Dr. Kim, thank you so much for your time today.
Liz, thank you for having me on your show.
Despite your busy schedule, you're visiting Korea once or twice a year, and this time you're visiting here for the World Education Forum. What is the significance of the World Education Forum?
Well, this is the most important event in education, and my colleagues and good friends, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and Irina Bokova, who's the head of UNESCO, invited me, and I thought that it was extremely important for me to be here to show my support for education initiatives. You know, I think the view of the World Bank Group and the view of finance ministers across the world is changing about education. It used to be thought of as something nice to do, but an expense. And now all of us have to wake up to the fact that investments in education are the most fundamental investments in the economic growth of the future.
The World Bank calls itself as the world's largest international education funder. Why is education crucial for the World Bank?
Well, what we know is that the performance, for example, on tests like the PISA test, and especially if you look at performance on the PISA tests for young people, and then performance on other tests for people leaving the working world, that the higher the differential, if you have very highly educated people going into the workforce and relatively less well-educated people leaving the workforce, the prospects for economic growth are really, really important. So it's really now thought of differently. It's not just a right that everyone has. It is certainly that, but it is the foundation of equality of opportunity. So better education means that your economy will grow, but then giving access to everyone to better education means that everyone in society will have an opportunity to become the president, to run a company, to have their own show on CNBC. This is what every country in the world looks for, and the path to a situation of true equality of opportunity is through education.
So the World Bank just announced it'll invest $5 billion over the next 5 years in education.
That's just a portion of it.
Right.
It's somewhere between 20 and 40% of the overall investment.
Oh,
yeah.
I see.
Yes, we invest a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what kind of outcome are you expecting from this investment?
You know, what we found is that instead of just giving money to countries for education, what we do is we give them money, we promise them money, but we say that we're going to pay only when we see certain results. So in other words, if girls are in school in the same number of boys, if schools actually open, if textbooks are available at the schools, if teachers are not absent for long periods of time, then we pay. What we found is that putting those conditions, and they're not conditionalities in some ideological sense. It's just very basic. You will get paid. Your schools will get money if you're actually teaching children. And what we found is that the outcomes were much better than previously when we just gave the schools the money. So now we're really expanding, and we're going to continue to expand even further.
Mm-hmm. In December 2013, the World Bank opened a Korea office. And what kind of role has it been playing?
You know, the Korea office was extremely important to me on a very personal level since I was born here. But the Korea and the World Bank has had 60 years of experience working together. So I was born in 1959, and so in 1954, Korea began receiving zero-interest loans, the loans for the poorest countries from the World Bank. And then over time, Korea became a donor to the World Bank, and Korea has been donating very generously now to the World Bank Group. This office is extremely important, and I'm very grateful to President Park and to Deputy Prime Minister Choi for supporting this office, because what it does is, on the one hand, it gives access to Korean businessmen, loans and guarantees so that they can make investments in developing countries. I still believe that the largest potential returns on investment are in the developing world. And so we have people here who work directly with Korean investors to help them find opportunities in developing countries. We also are learning from Korea. There's so many innovations. You know, I just had my head of the water practice come here, and he learned that Korea has one of the most outstanding water management systems in the entire world. So we're going to take the lessons from the Korean water management system and spread them to the world. And of course, we all know about the tremendous innovations that have happened in Korean education. Those will be shared with the world also. But the other thing is we hope that anyone with some kind of problem, whether it be infrastructure or in this case education, even though the system is getting such good results, I know there are many complaints from students especially about how difficult the system is, but it's getting good results. Still, there's a lot of discussion about how Korean education could get better. So what we hope is that our office could be the source of getting insights on innovative, effective practices in education from all over the world and bring them here to Korea. The Korea office is extremely important for the World Bank Group, and we hope it will be for Korea as well.
Mm-hmm. There are so many projects the World Bank is involved in right now. What are the focus areas for the World Bank lately?
Well, you know, we have two goals. One is to end extreme poverty by 2030, and the other is to boost shared prosperity. Now, ending extreme poverty by 2030 will be extremely difficult. By 2020, half of all people living in extreme poverty, which is less than $1.25 a day, in 2005 dollars, less than $1.25 a day, is still 1 billion people, and by 2020, half of all the people living in extreme poverty will live in the so-called fragile and conflict-affected states. So those are typically the most difficult to reach, and so we're now trying to think, what do we need to do in the fragile and conflict-affected states to ensure that we can still lift people out of poverty? It's an extremely difficult challenge. And in terms of shared prosperity, you know, everywhere in the world, there are discussions about inequality. Right here in Korea, you know, what we hear is that, is it really possible, if you're not wealthy, to get into the right hagwons so that you can have a chance to get into Seouldaekyo? These are constant questions. Every single country in the world that we work with has these questions. And so we're trying to figure out, how can you grow the economy, create more wealth, create more jobs, and at the same time make sure that the bottom 40% get a larger share so that they catch up. It's not a simple problem, but it's one for which we have 70 years of experience. We have thousands of people with PhDs and master's degrees looking all over the world to figure out, how can we help countries to grow quickly, but grow in a way that's more equal. If we can help with those countries, I think we'd be very satisfied.
Earlier this year, the World Bank predicted the global economy this year will improve, but with certain uncertainties. What is your outlook now, and what are the factors that pose uncertainty to the global economy?
Right, so there are a couple of major ones, of course, but we have reduced our expectations for growth a little bit more globally. Now, there are two really major factors that we see right now having an impact, and the first is the continued very low oil prices. So one of the things that we're seeing is that the impact of low oil prices on oil exporting nations, especially the developing countries, has been much larger than we expected. So you know, Russia, of course, Nigeria, other oil exporting countries have had a much deeper and longer and more severe impact than we had expected. Now, the flip side of low oil prices, of course, is that the oil importing countries should get a nice boost, and that their growth should be accelerated. But we haven't yet seen that. So the impact of the low oil prices has been longer and more negative than we expected. So that's one of the things. And along with the low oil prices have been lower commodity prices overall. So a lot of the commodity exporting countries, many of them are developing countries, of course, are experiencing difficulty. The other, of course, is the eventual rise in interest rates. Now, you know, we're not quite sure when it's going to happen. Everyone is listening to every word that Janet Yellen is saying to try to get some sense of it. You know, now I would say most analysts we talk to are not sure that it will happen in 2015. It may be into 2016. But what we know is that it will happen eventually. And then the question is, once that happens, what's going to happen? Have all the adjustments already been made? Is it going to be a non-event? Or will money quickly move out of emerging markets again, as it did in June 2013 when Ben Bernanke began first talking about this and we had the so-called taper tantrum? No one's sure, but what we know for sure, though, what we do know for sure is that the countries that have prepared, the countries that have built back fiscal buffers, the countries that have managed their public budgets with great care and prudence, the countries that have clear, transparent monetary policies that are managed effectively by good governors, and especially the countries that have undertaken necessary structural reforms to get themselves on the path to growth, they will be less affected. Now, Prime Minister Modi's here, right? And he is a fantastic example of how you can really transform the prospects of a country in a fairly short period of time. During the taper tantrum in June 2013, there was a great exodus from India of capital, and the currency was radically devalued. Our own expectation is that that won't happen this time because Prime Minister Modi, the finance minister, central bank governor, have all done really strong work. So this is what we're saying. All of these risks are there, but if you have good fiscal policy, if you have transparent monetary policy, and you do the structural reforms you need to take on, then you're going to do much, much better as interest rates go up.
All right. Economic outlook for Korea remains murky as the country is stuck between slowing China and recovering Japan. What is your growth outlook for South Korean economy, and what is the right move for policymakers?
There's little question, I think, that we're in a period of low growth and deflation, and the inflation expectations are not anywhere near what I think the Korean government had hoped. And so I think Deputy Prime Minister Che is doing exactly the right thing. He's got a very expansionary policy, and he's going to continue to support consumption, for example, until things return to normal. I think their Korean government is affected by, like everyone else, the slower growth than normal of its trading partners. And it's also this effect that I told you about with oil prices, that the impact has not been what we'd expect. Overall, lower oil prices should result in higher growth, right? Because if you compare the impact on oil exporters versus oil importers, overall the impact should be higher growth. We just haven't seen that yet. As Europe recovers, as China adjusts its own economic growth expectations, and we hope returns to higher growth, as India goes to much higher growth, I mean, we're predicting that India will grow at over 8% in the next year. All those things should help Korea get back on the right path. In the meantime, I think Deputy Prime Minister Che is doing the right thing.
Dr. Kim, thank you so much for your precious time today.
Thank you very much.
감사합니다.
감사합니다.